Daniel had always been on the move. As a project manager, business trips were just part of the job. Sure, the money was good, more than good, really, but things got a lot trickier after he tied the knot. Being away from home wasn't just inconvenient anymore. It tugged at something deeper. His wife, Rebecca, didn't take his absences lightly. Every time he packed a suitcase, she unraveled tears, accusations, threats to run off to her mother's place. Over lunch one afternoon, a colleague casually asked him why he kept putting up with the theatrics. "Why don't you just draw the line?" the guy suggested, a little too confidently. But Daniel knew better than to waste breath explaining the complicated push and pull of marriage to someone still flying solo. In spite of everything, the second year of their marriage brought a surprising twist. Rebecca was pregnant. She broke the news unexpectedly, and Daniel was over the moon. For all the tension and turbulence, he believed they were financially stable and emotionally ready to welcome a child. 9 months later, baby Mia came into the world, stealing their hearts with one look. Something shifted in Rebecca after that. Her fire mellowed into warmth. With her focused entirely on their daughter, the arguments simmered down. For a while, it felt like a fresh start. Eventually, Daniel decided it was time for a change. He quit the job that kept him on the road and took one that let him be home for dinner. Rebecca lit up at the news. She'd waited so long for him to choose them over career, and this felt like a victory for their little family. To mark the end of his traveling days, Daniel treated Mia to ice cream at a cozy cafe. They laughed, shared spoons, and made a memory. Later, during their drive home from kindergarten, Mia leaned over with a mischievous grin and said, "Daddy, I've got a secret." Daniel smiled, expecting some silly story, maybe a playground crush or a fib about nap time. But what she said next hit him like a punch to the chest. "Whenever you're not here," Mia chirped, "Mommy picks me up with her friend, Uncle Nicholas. He comes over to our house sometimes too." Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. He asked her again, this time with a more serious tone, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. But a gnawing doubt had already taken root. The whole thing wouldn't leave his mind. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, he sat down with his friend Kevin and spilled everything. Kevin listened, then leaned in with a simple but bold suggestion: hire a private investigator. "What if she only sees the guy when I'm not around?" Daniel asked, trying to find a flaw in the plan. Kevin smirked. "Come on, man. If they're doing something shady, they're not exactly subtle. They'll just pretend when you're home." After a night of tossing and turning, Daniel agreed. For the next 2 weeks, he lived with a knot in his stomach. Oddly enough, Rebecca stayed unusually composed during that time. No outbursts, no drama, just eerie calm. Then came the day. The detective had arranged to meet in the underground parking lot of a shopping mall, low profile, just in case. Daniel waited in his car, nerves frayed, when he heard a tap on the window. A man in a smart blue coat greeted him with a nod. "Hey, Daniel." He handed over a plain envelope. "It's open," he added, almost casually. "What's in it?" Daniel asked, voice tight. "See for yourself," the man replied. With trembling fingers, Daniel opened the envelope and out slid a neat stack of photographs. The photos Daniel received were spread across the table, each one stamped with a date and time from different spots around the city. The man in the pictures, always with Rebecca, was a stranger to him. "You didn't recognize him?" the detective asked. Inside the envelope, a slip of paper revealed the man's full name, his workplace, and other personal details. Daniel's stomach sank as he realized the truth. Rebecca's lover, Dennis, wasn't just some random guy, he was her coworker. How long had this been going on? How long had Rebecca kept this secret from him? The questions circled in Daniel's mind as he handed over the remainder of the fee to the detective and left the meeting. He drove straight to his parents' house with Mia in tow, keeping his daughter away from the tension awaiting him at home. When he arrived, Rebecca was there, waiting for him. Without a word, Daniel went straight to the kitchen and slammed the stack of photographs onto the table. The images, showing Rebecca and Dennis in compromising positions from passionate kisses to intimate moments, lay there in front of her. Rebecca glanced at the photos briefly, then locked eyes with Daniel. To his shock, she wasn't apologetic, she wasn't even defensive. "Are you out of your mind, following me around?" she shot back, the words sharp and dismissive. Daniel stood frozen. He had expected anger, or perhaps fear, but not this. She casually revealed that she'd been wanting to leave him for a long time, and her confession came with an unsettling nonchalance. She laughed bitterly, as if the detective's services were a joke. and carelessly let the photos slide to the floor. "Give me a week to pack," she said. But when Daniel offered a single day, she shrugged it off. "That'll be enough," she declared with an eerie confidence. She was ready to leave, and nothing seemed to faze her. Daniel was shattered. He couldn't wrap his mind around Rebecca's coldness. Why had she stayed with him for so long if she felt this way? He forced her to sign a document granting him full custody of Mia, ensuring that she would no longer be a part of their lives. Rebecca promised she'd visit Mia, but those visits never came. After their separation, Rebecca didn't settle with Dennis as Daniel had feared. Instead, she was often seen out with different men, usually drunk and lost in a world of recklessness. As time passed, Daniel realized a painful truth. Part of him was relieved. The woman who had hurt him was now gone, and with her, the shadow she cast over his and Mia's lives. Daniel didn't want Mia influenced by someone like her, and though the betrayal stung, it was a relief to have a clean break. For a while, Daniel didn't seek another relationship. He focused on his daughter, traveling with her, cherishing every moment they spent together. Mia's grandmother stepped in, offering the kind of maternal love and guidance Rebecca had failed to give. Years later, as a teenager, Mia asked Daniel about her mother. When Daniel shared the truth, Mia didn't hesitate to reassure him. "You made the right choices," she said. And in that moment, Daniel knew that sometimes, clarity in the midst of pain can lead to a life that's finally at peace. Before meeting Patrick, Megan had her own story. She'd been married before, to Theodore, for several years. Things had started off well, but their relationship crumbled under the weight of Theodore's work problems. Megan described her ex-husband as someone who had pretended to be successful, but was ultimately just keeping up appearances. After she left him, Theodore was left with a failing business, mounting debts, and a life falling apart. Neither of them made the effort to salvage their marriage. Theodore lacked the capability, and Megan wasn't willing to carry the burden on her own. It wasn't long before Megan met Patrick. He swept her off her feet with thoughtful gifts and gestures, always knowing how to lift her spirits when she felt down. Almost everything about Patrick charmed Megan except for his ongoing ties to his ex-wife and daughter. Though they weren't a family anymore, Patrick still felt a deep responsibility toward them. He spent weekends with his daughter, which didn't sit well with Megan. She wanted his attention, his time, to be fully hers. On those weekends, Patrick wouldn't even take her calls, leaving her frustrated, only for him to apologize later with more flowers and presents. 6 months into their relationship, Patrick proposed. Megan didn't hesitate to say yes. Compared to Theodore, Patrick seemed like a much better choice. She was eager to build a future with him, especially with the hope of having a child. Megan convinced herself that once they had a baby, Patrick would focus solely on her, leaving his past family behind. Megan had been caught in a cycle of misfortune for 6 long years. Each day seemed to drag her further into frustration, especially as she noticed Patrick's growing indifference to their situation. The tension in their home became unbearable, and their arguments became more frequent, each one more heated than the last. Patrick's patience began to wear thin, and Megan's hysteria, once confined to moments of distress, was now a constant companion. "I'm trying so hard for us. I just want us to be a real family," she shouted in desperation. Her voice was raw, desperate for recognition, for understanding. Patrick, attempting to calm the storm, responded gently, though there was a weariness in his tone. "We are a real family, darling." But Megan didn't feel it, and as the months passed, her frustration only grew. She became fixated on the idea of having a child with Patrick, believing that it would somehow solidify their bond, bring them the happiness they had both been chasing. But as time went on, she started to wonder if the child would ever come. The stress of trying without success wore on her, and soon her mind began to entertain a troubling thought. Perhaps she could seek help elsewhere. She started running through a mental list of acquaintances, and before long, her ex-husband Theodore came to the forefront. Megan had kept track of Theodore's life after their divorce. He had managed to rebuild after the collapse of his business, had even turned it into a successful venture. He seemed to have his life together, a stark contrast to the man she had left behind all those years ago. Her mind made up, Megan reached out to him, and to her surprise he agreed to meet. She kept her motives hidden, wanting to keep things casual at first, not wanting to reveal her intentions too soon. When they met at the restaurant, Megan was struck by the change in Theodore. The man who had once been broken and lost in a sea of failures now stood before her, a handsome, confident stranger. The transformation was not just physical, there was an energy about him, a vitality she hadn't expected. Megan found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't anticipated. An emotion she thought long buried resurfaced. The evening passed in effortless conversation, the years between them slipping away as though they had never been apart. From that night on, they began to communicate regularly through social media, their connection growing deeper with each message, each shared memory. Megan was flattered by Theodore's attention. His sympathy felt like a balm to her wounds, a reassurance that she hadn't made a mistake by leaving him all those years ago. Her desire for a child with Patrick, which had consumed her for so long, began to fade into the background. Instead, she found herself increasingly drawn to Theodore, sneaking around to meet him without Patrick's knowledge, her guilt mounting with every encounter. Patrick began to notice the change in Megan. She was distant, her once vibrant energy now dull and distracted. One evening, during dinner, Patrick broached the subject that had been weighing on his mind. He asked gently, almost hesitantly, "Darling, have you been to the doctor?" Megan froze. She had been expecting this, yet still, the question caught her off guard. "Oh, yes, no. Why? What's happened?" Patrick's gaze softened, but there was a hint of concern behind his calm exterior. "Have you been keeping up with your appointments? I thought we agreed you would go regularly." Megan struggled to offer a convincing excuse for why she had neglected her visits, trying to evade the topic. Patrick, though worried, chose not to push her further. He had long suspected that Megan's obsession with having a child was a way of compensating for deeper issues in their relationship. The idea of a child, he thought, might somehow fix everything. But he had also agreed to step back, to allow her to live without the constant pressure. He nodded slowly, unsure of how to proceed but aware that something had shifted in their dynamic. Megan, sensing his hesitance, exhaled deeply, clearly relieved. Patrick, though, was still troubled. In the days that followed, he couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. He confided in his friends, sharing his growing concerns about Megan's odd behavior. "She's different," he told them, his voice low. "I don't know what's going on, but I can't figure it out." One of his friends smirked, an eyebrow raised in amusement. "Just make sure she's not got someone else on the side. You might end up raising another man's kid." At first, Patrick laughed it off, fiercely defending Megan, adamant that she would never do such a thing. But as the words lingered in the air, a cold fear began to gnaw at him. Could it be true? Deep down, he feared that Megan had fallen into someone else's arms, and that his worst nightmare was about to come true. Patrick had always adored his wife, Megan, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. As he bid his friends farewell at the bar, the weight of his thoughts pressed on him. Stepping outside into the crisp night air, he flicked his lighter and inhaled deeply, the smoke swirling in the cold air. For a brief moment, there was a sense of contentment as the cigarette's warmth filled his lungs. It was then that Alexander, a friend from the bar, emerged from behind him, leaning casually against the wall. "Hey," Alexander began, his tone carrying a hint of concern. "I don't want to intrude, but if you ever need it, I know a guy, a detective, actually. He could help you figure out what's going on." His eyes shifted downward, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "How do you and Rebecca manage to make it look so perfect?" Patrick's mind buzzed with the words, but he didn't answer immediately. Alexander's expression shifted to something more contemplative, and he fell silent, allowing the weight of the question to linger. Patrick nodded, though his heart was heavy with doubt. The idea of investigating Megan, of questioning her loyalty in such a direct way, was unsettling. It gnawed at him, tearing at the very fabric of his trust in her. Days passed, and Patrick remained in turmoil. One part of him, his more rational side, considered it, wondering if the fear of betrayal was enough to justify the intrusion. But the other side of him, the side that had always believed in their bond, recoiled at the thought. To betray Megan's trust in such a way felt wrong, even cruel. Yet the fear that she might be hiding something beyond his reach, gnawed at him relentlessly. This internal battle consumed him for an entire week, the uncertainty only deepening. Then, one evening, as he sat in the dim light of his living room, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and his heart skipped a beat when the voice on the other end introduced himself. "This is Theodore," the voice said, calm yet purposeful. "I'm Megan's ex-husband." Patrick's pulse quickened. There was no need for small talk. Theodore wasted no time in explaining his reason for calling. Megan had confided in him about her plans to have a child, and while he had initially been resistant, she had persuaded him to consider it. However, Theodore was unwilling to move forward with her plan, and instead, he was taking matters into his own hands. He had decided to tell Patrick everything. His tone was courteous, but there was an underlying edge to it, one that Patrick couldn't ignore. Despite his surprise, Patrick kept his composure and insisted that they meet face to face. "We need to talk in person," he said firmly. After a short pause, Theodore agreed, and that evening Patrick found himself sitting in a dimly lit corner of his favorite pub, waiting for a man he had never really seen, but for whom he already felt an irresistible sense of irritation. When Theodore arrived, he didn't waste time on pleasantries. He was blunt, revealing the extent of Megan's plans, the details she had shared with him, and his own reluctance to participate. Theodore explained that, out of some twisted sense of male solidarity, he had decided to come forward, to expose the truth. But as Patrick listened, he began to sense something else, a more sinister undertone in Theodore's words. It wasn't just about helping Patrick, it was about revenge. Theodore had an axe to grind, and Megan had been the target for years. The conversation between the two men was charged with a kind of malevolent energy, as they discussed their plans. It wasn't enough to simply confront Megan, they needed to teach her a lesson, to show her the consequences of her actions. And with that thought in mind, they parted ways, each with their own set of intentions. Patrick, left alone in the pub, drank more than he should have. The alcohol dulled his senses, but it did little to quiet the storm brewing inside him. His mind raced, torn between the betrayal he felt and the twisted curiosity that Theodore's revelation had sparked. Meanwhile, Theodore had a different plan in motion. He invited his mistress to his dacha, an isolated retreat far from the city, one Megan had never visited. The evening promised an escape from the complexities of the city, and Theodore's invitation was met with eager anticipation. His mistress, blissfully unaware of the trap waiting for her, accepted without hesitation. As they made their way to the dacha, Theodore mentioned casually that he had reconsidered Megan's proposal. The words seemed to please her, and she smiled, oblivious to the dark turn the evening was about to take. Upon arriving, Theodore led her inside, showing her the beauty of the house. Megan admired the architecture, the luxury that surrounded her, but her thoughts were quickly drawn away when Theodore promised her a surprise. He guided her upstairs with a glint in his eye, a glimmer of something she couldn't quite place. As they reached the top of the stairs, Megan felt a shiver of excitement run down her spine. But it was soon clear that the surprise awaiting her was far from what she expected. The air seemed to thicken with tension, the walls of the house closing in on her, as the door creaked open. What lay beyond it was not the promise of a new beginning, but a confrontation with her past and with the consequences of the decisions she had made. Her breath caught in her throat, and before she could make sense of the scene before her, she let out a piercing scream. "Patrick, what are you doing here?" Her gaze flickered between him and Theodore, trying to piece together the puzzle, but it only left her more confused. "Traitor!" she shouted, her voice filled with fury. Without thinking, she lunged toward Theodore, her fists swinging wildly in anger, each blow landing without aim. But Theodore, with unsettling calm, gently pushed her away, and she stumbled backward, crashing onto the bed. "Deceiver!" she cried bitterly, her words raw with betrayal. "Patrick," she pleaded through tears, her voice desperate. "You can't let this happen. You don't deserve this." But when she looked at him, there was nothing but cold indifference in his eyes. Hatred, anger, and disgust swirled within him as he locked eyes with the woman he had once called his wife, the woman he had given everything for, only to realize too late how blind he had been to the venom she had woven into their lives. After the second divorce, Megan found herself adrift, staying temporarily with a friend. Both Theodore and Patrick withdrew from her, emotionally and physically. The silence between them was deafening. Patrick refused to speak to her directly, communicating only through lawyers, his bitterness evident in every cold letter. This sudden rejection coming from two men who had once been so central in her life wounded her in ways she couldn't fully grasp. She had poured her heart into both marriages, and now, both had crumbled around her. All she had ever wanted was a stable, loving family, yet it seemed that every effort she had made had led her further into isolation. Unable to find solace, Megan began to drown her sorrows in alcohol. What started as an escape soon spiraled into a destructive habit. Night after night, she lost herself in a haze of drunken stupor, only to wake up in strange apartments, tangled in the arms of unfamiliar men. But no matter how much she drank, the pain, the shame, and the loneliness lingered, stubbornly refusing to be erased. In the emptiness of her new reality, she found no peace, no answers, just the echo of the family she had once longed to build, now reduced to a painful memory.